Is it on?
It's not. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for honoring our invitation to this press conference. As you are all aware, Africa remains the region hardest hit by climate change, but possesses the least capacity to deal with the nature of the emergency and the scale of the impacts that the continent is already facing. And so this afternoon, we have a panel that would very quickly discuss some of the key things that, as African civil society organizations, we hope to see at the end of this COP here in Madrid. I'd like to quickly introduce those who are here with me on the panel. And before I do that, to our friends of the media, we have already put out a media advisory that contains some of these issues that will be discussed here. They're on the official COP media portal. You can go there and download our press releases and the summary of the African demands from this COP. We're going to have, just to my left, Tracy Sonny of the Botswana Climate Change Network. Next to her is Fazal Isa of Sokoine Foundation. And we have Mr. Augustine Jamshi, who is the chair of the Political Affairs Committee of the Pan-African Climate Change Justice Alliance and coordinator of the African Coalition for Sustainable Energy and Access. Just next to him is Mwanahasimi Singano of FEMNET. I struggled with that as promised. And we also have with us Mr. Kone, who is chair of the Environment and Rural Economy Committee at the Pan-African Parliament. Since we only have 30 minutes, I'm going to quickly give the floor to Augustine to set the ball rolling. Africa is coming to this COP with some very specific demands. And one of them is about recognizing the special circumstances and needs of Africa based on the current science. And I would like Augustine to throw a little more light on this need and focus essentially on what Africa really wants and why Africa is taking this new attitude at the COPs. Augustine.
Thank you very much, Eugene, for this opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa has always been a continent that is unique in many senses. If you look at the Bali Action Plan, the GEF, that's Global Environment Facilities, and the Green Climate Fund, Africa has always been put alongside vulnerable countries, especially LDCs. But in Paris in 2015, the Paris Agreement was concluded without this special recognition of Africa as a continent that should be taken care of in a special way. And as a compromise, the French presidency then promised to have open-ended consultations with other parties to make sure that this finds its way again into the documents of the Paris Agreement. They made consultations in May 2016. Then, science was becoming evidently clear that it's not just about vulnerability of Africa. Vulnerability being defined, the definition not only being limited to the potential or the predisposition to be exposed to extreme weather conditions, but the potential or the strength of recovering from it is always even more important. So we do not want to limit our special circumstances to vulnerability, but on the sciences. You know, the IPCC Fourth Assessment Report had already indicated that Africa has the potential of warming more than 1.5 times the global mean temperature. And of course, when you look at the special assessment report that was released in October last year, you see that Africa is even warming faster than we thought. So, to that effect, the African group of negotiators presented this formal request at COP24 to make sure that a decision is taken for Africa to be recognized as a continent, not only with special needs, but with special circumstances following the sciences. This never happened at that COP. We have come as Africans again to say this is very, very important, because it is only and unless we recognize Africa as a continent with special needs and in special circumstances, we will not treat the African continent with the emergency and the gravity that it deserves. So we are calling on parties to take that very seriously. We stand on the side of our governments and our negotiators to make sure that this is recognized. This is not fairy tale. We don't just feel good to say that. It's because it is proven by sciences. But is Africa sitting quiet? No. When you look at the indices that were proposed a couple of years ago, Africa was one of the continents that proposed the first ever indices. And you see that they are very much linked or conditional to financial support and technology support. We are calling for other countries, especially the major emitters, to take the bull by the horns, and come out with enhanced ambition. Because whatever we do as developing countries, our emission is very little. If we're only concentrating on developing countries, we'll never solve the problem. So these countries, major emitters, should come out clearly and say how much they want to enhance their ambition. And secondly, we saw at the Global Summit on Climate Action that many countries that came on board to declare or to promise something were mostly developing countries, those who are struggling with day-to-day needs of a country. The big guys did not come to the table. We are asking them to show proof of leadership and come and put their own enhanced ambitions on the table. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Augustine. You point out quite clearly that there are financial implications for this special status. And one of the things that Africa has been keen about is highlighting the fact that, as far as the continent is concerned, given the levels of vulnerability, the exposures that are being experienced, and even the fact that Africa is not contributing so much to the problem of climate change, that adaptation should remain at the top of the priority for Africa. And the financial support to accompany this hasn't followed, isn't it, Fazal?
Yes, indeed. Climate finance is very important for Africa, as we want to be recognized as having special circumstances and needs. So what we are calling for is fulfillment of the previous climate finance commitment under the pre-2020 commitment, the $100 billion goal per year by 2020, and also the post-2020, so the new scale-up climate finance commitment to fund adaptation. So yes, adaptation financing is a top priority for African continent, and we are also calling for enhanced, predictable, and grant-based financing to adaptation. And one of the important funds is the adaptation fund. As parties agreed for adaptation fund to save the Paris Agreement, we also call for a reliable source to fund the adaptation fund so as to have a sustainable financing sources, and also to maintain the current structure of the adaptation fund board that have equal representation for developing and developed countries. So this will make it easier for access to adaptation financing. But taking back now to the new scale-up finance commitment, we are calling for the new, for the discussion to initiate the setting of new quantified climate finance goal to take into consideration the experience. We had the $100 billion, so this experience should be taken forward. And importantly, the priorities and needs of developing countries, including Africa, should be taken on board to inform such experience. So the goals should also be scientifically informed and not just coming up with a figure. Apart from that, during the period, they should continue to fulfill the previous commitment. As we understand, the process will start next year, and maybe it will take up to 2025. So during the period, they should commit and fulfill their commitment of $100 billion per year up to setting up of the new goal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, still within the framework of this special status for Africa is the discussion around Article 6 of the Paris Agreement that has to do with carbon market mechanism. And Africa is trying to position itself with this, in this respect quite concretely, but also in terms of loss and damage, which is something that the African continent has been asking the international community to mainstream in the UNFCCC processes. If you can shed more light on the position, Tracy, on these two issues.
Thank you very much. Of course, the issue of market mechanism continue to be of interest debate, especially among the African group and us as the civil society, where we are coming from a point of view as we need to respect the human rights aspect, and there's no way we can ensure effective climate response without considering the human rights component. We cannot disassociate the two. And of course, the Paris Agreement does state the need for climate actions which respect human rights or which promote human rights. And this can be the right to health, gender equality, women empowerment, indigenous people's rights, and the right to development. However, we are seeing when we bring in the issue of market mechanisms, they continue to hamper, they continue to affect negatively the people's rights. And where countries now, African countries, are starting to embrace the issue of market mechanisms with the false solutions on economic enhancement, you know, we are really saying as the African civil society, you need to build robust social and environmental guidelines that can protect human rights. And as we move forward into the next stage as the Africa Group, we need to consider how our response, especially our response to this market mechanism, will affect Africa. And we need to know that the more we open up for the corporations, the more we are putting our people's lives in danger, especially the African people who are already suffering and who need you know, they need us to assist them. But however, because of the false solutions that we keep on falling for, we keep on putting our people in the wrong pathway of suffering more from the impacts of climate change. And of course, when you come to issues of loss and damage, Africa continues to suffer. You talk of droughts, you talk of floods, you talk of cyclones, people are dying. And recently, even in the SADC region, we had the most bad cyclone sweeping across Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. And many people died, and many people lost their lives. They lost their properties. And this is where we are saying, of course, we understand at the national level, countries or governments have made efforts to come up with programs for loss and damage or for disaster risk reduction or disaster response. But this needs to be effective. Can't we redesign and ensure that these are targeted and respond well to the events that are coming up as we go on, as we experience the impacts of climate change? But of most important is it's where we are saying there is a need to implement and operationalize the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. And this includes financing for the ongoing, including the incurred loss and damage that is being experienced, or to ensure that we have adequate finance for the loss and damage at the African level. We do appreciate the efforts that are ongoing, but also like we said, or like what Augustine says, Africa is a special case, and it's where we need to act fast and ensure that we have response actions or disaster response actions in place, targeted ones and effective ones that can work well, so that we don't have or experience what we experience, especially coming from the SADC region, where we lost a lot of people from the region. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Now, all of these issues are inherently gendered, and on the continent, this has been an important concern. Michelle?
Yes, we coming from the continent where women make the majority of the population, but also women make the majority of poor, women make the majority of illiterate. And that's not to say that we don't have women as active agents of change, but is to paint a picture where the patriarchal system manifested in both sociocultural, political, and economic system has denied women, youth, and people living with a disability their agents to be active agents of change. In that context, women continue to be the most impacted. And with the fourth solution it traces, talking about in the special circumstances that Augustine has spoken about, women in the continent continue to be the victim of the crisis that they have not contributed to. Emergency and climate crisis is has formed part of the daily life and daily struggles of the most women in the continent. To that end, we do feel as African civil society that any effort to address climate change has to put women at the center of that, of the fight. And that is to say, not to look at the women as just a passive recipients of aid and support, but to look at the women as active agents of change. And that includes, for example, making the finance mechanism work for women and youth, making programs that address women's need to make sure that women not only survive in a broken system, but also they thrive in the broken system. So with that, we as African civil society, we align ourselves with the women and gender constituency by calling the parties to fully implement gender action plan, and that which is also include financing it and including having a clear target and indicators. As of now, the gender action plan doesn't have indicators, so we are not sure where we're measuring from and what are the indicators of success. And that's, for example, should include as well inclusion of women in the national delegation. The Secretariat have done a good job of tracking, for example, the number of women heading the delegation, and unfortunately the number has been increasing. But unless we know where the indicators, where we're targeting, and what are the target that we want to achieve, we won't be able to progressively address the question of gender in the negotiating, but overall outside these conferences as well.
Thanks very much, Michelle. If we can just in 2 minutes, Augustine Kone, share the views of the African Parliament on all of these issues, so that we can have at least a couple of minutes to take 1 or 2 questions from the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much to give us the opportunity to give our point of view concerning that Paris Agreement. First of all, I can say that we as parliamentarians, we are here to support the civil society. You can be sure that we will support you in all your actions. Secondly, Augustine said, yes, Africa is a specific case in this climate change. I would like to give you just one example. You can see that Chile have been replaced by Spain in 1 month only. How many African countries you see that they can replace a country in 1 month? That shows that we are a specific continent and we need to have a specific treatment. We cannot be treated like the developing country. Yes, we agree with you. Africa has to be treated differently. And because we don't have the same challenges to face. And I can assure you again that we are here. You can count on us. We are here to support you as African parliamentarians. Thank you.
Thanks indeed. We just have time for about 1 or 2 questions from the floor. If you can, 1 or 2 questions from the floor, and we're going to be able to wrap up. Yes.
You are going to answer that.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask, when Africa going to know that they have lost? Look at the situation. You've been coming to this conference for how many years? You are not getting any support for adaptation. You are not getting any support for all the means. You did not cause the problem. 51 countries, 1% of the contribution. You are not getting the capacity, you are not getting the knowledge, you are not getting technology transfer, you are not getting the finance, you are not getting any of this. Even now, the special case of Africa that was recognized in the framework, it's not accepted in Paris Agreement. And we've been dragging from one COP to another one about it, and we're not getting anywhere. When are you going to realize you have lost? And you must have a different tactics and different approach.
Thank you very much. Has Africa lost the fight? Augustine, let me throw that question to you.
Africa has not lost the fight because Africa is still up and standing and fighting, and that's why we're here. We won't accept anyone to tell us that we have no future. We won't accept anyone to tell us that they no more owe us. We'll continue to tell them that they have caused this problem. We are suffering from it more than any other person, and that's the language we have to speak. Sometimes we are told that if you keep saying it that way, you will never get anything. Let's not get anything, but you have the guilt that you have spoiled the world and you don't want to fix it for those who are suffering from it. This is the case. We have not lost. We are fighting and we'll continue to fight until we get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and we're going to wrap this up. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Kulegani from South Africa. I appreciate to hear from you all talking about how Africa is a special case. I've heard you talking about how it affects our social economy or our society at large. I've heard you speaking about the market. I've heard you speaking about women, how it affects our women in Africa. Now I need to know, how does it affect the youth? Because the youth are also a majority group in Africa, and the youth in Africa are suffering from unemployment among many other challenges, and unemployment also goes with unemployability. Then you go to address also
let me cut you. I think you've asked your question because we don't have time. I'm going to ask Fazal to quickly respond to that. And Misha, if you have something to add, and this will be it.
Yeah, indeed, a number of groups that Africa are affected, including the youth, which are the majority in Africa. I think Mishi mentioned something on the gender action plan that include the youth. So yeah, there have been some misconception. Mish is best placed to do that. So it's not just women as part of the gender. So youth are part of it, including the access to finance, which the youth provide some sort of innovation to address climate change issues. So yeah, over to you, Mish.
Thank you. I think to start with Dr. Adad's question, I think climate change is the fight that Africa cannot afford to lose, because we don't have that luxury. We don't have planet B. Yes. We don't have another Earth that we could live and thrive. So this is it. And we don't have luxury to withdraw from the negotiation. We don't have the luxury to withdraw from fighting for what is rightfully African. And to most of the African, the question of climate change is not just a question of preserving the environment alone, but it's the question on how do we live and thrive. It's a question about our livelihood, it's a question of our development, it's a question about our democracy, it's a question about human existence in the continent. So it's the broader question which includes literally everything. And at the core of it, it's the question, as you have indicated, on how do we transit one generation to the other, how do we prepare the next generation, how do we create safe jobs, for example, how do we create a sustainable development that we're not just leaving the continent which is crumbling, but we're leaving a continent which is clean, is safe, and is prosperous for the youth, but for the next generation to come.
Thank you very much. I must thank everyone for honoring our invitation. I'd like to, at this point, to invite our friends of the media to the official media portal. We have a statement on that portal which you can download and learn more about these issues that we have mentioned here. There is also a press release that has gone out. We are at stand 26 for the rest of the day. If you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to come there. And we'll be able to answer them. Thank you again, and do have stand 26, hall 4, just outside this room, stand 26, booth 26. Thanks indeed, and enjoy the rest of the day.
No, you know what, when you're putting it like this, I so understand.